The Roman army moved with discipline and order. When a city fell, the noise of battle faded quickly. What followed was quieter, and often worse. For the women who survived a Roman conquest, the end of fighting did not mean safety. It marked the beginning of a different kind of fear. In the ancient world, defeat stripped a community of protection. Roman warfare was not only about territory or power, it was about dominance. Victory gave soldiers legal and social permission to claim the defeated as property. Captured women stood among the most vulnerable. Their fate was shaped not by individual cruelty alone, but by laws, customs, and expectations that normalized suffering. Rome expanded through centuries of near-constant war. From Spain to Gaul, from Greece to Judea, entire populations were absorbed into the empire by force. Each conquest followed a familiar pattern. Towns were surrounded, starved, assaulted, and broken. Men of fighting age were often killed during resistance or executed afterward. Those who survived were enslaved. Women and children were taken alive more often, not out of mercy, but because they had economic value. For captured women, the first hours after defeat were chaotic and terrifying. Homes were searched, families were torn apart. Women were pulled into streets or camps, often without knowing if their children were still alive. Roman sources rarely describe these moments in detail. When they do, the language is detached. The suffering is assumed, not examined. Silence itself becomes evidence of how ordinary this violence was. Once under Roman control, women were classified as spoils of war. This was not hidden or controversial in Roman society. Roman law recognized enslaved people as property, not as individuals with rights. A captive woman had no legal protection against abuse. What happened to her depended entirely on who claimed ownership. Some women were taken directly by soldiers. Commanders sometimes tried to impose order, but discipline rarely extended to compassion. Sexual violence was an expected consequence of conquest, not a crime. Ancient historians describe victorious armies being given the defeated population. This phrase, repeated across texts, carried a clear meaning understood by its audience. Other women were gathered and transported to temporary holding areas. There, they were sorted like goods. Age, physical condition, and perceived health determined their fate. Young women were valued highly. Older women were often considered less useful and were sold cheaply or assigned to harsh labor. Many captives were marched long distances to slave markets. The journey itself was deadly. Bound together, underfed, and exposed to weather, disease spread quickly. Women weakened by siege and trauma struggled to survive the march. Those who collapsed were often left behind. At the markets, women were displayed for inspection. Buyers examined bodies openly. Strength, fertility, and obedience were assumed from appearance alone. Names were erased. Origins were reduced to labels. A woman from Gaul or Syria became a commodity defined by price, not history. Once sold, life rarely improved. Domestic slavery was often described by Roman writers as gentler than other forms, but this depended entirely on the owner. Enslaved women worked long hours grinding grain, carrying water, cleaning, and caring for children not their own. They lived under constant surveillance. Punishment was arbitrary. Silence was survival. For many captives, enslavement included forced sexual availability. Roman law allowed owners full control over the bodies of the enslaved. Resistance was dangerous. Pregnancy was common. Children born into slavery inherited their mother's status, becoming property at birth. This ensured a self-perpetuating system of human ownership. Some women were sent to rural estates. There, isolation increased vulnerability. Overseers enforced discipline with violence. Disease spread easily in crowded slave quarters. Medical care was minimal. A sick or injured woman could be replaced more cheaply than treated. Others were forced into state-owned slavery. These women worked in workshops, mines, or public construction. Conditions were brutal. Life expectancy was short. For women assigned to mines, survival beyond a few years was rare. Not all suffering was physical. Psychological trauma was constant and unacknowledged. Captured women lived with the memory of loss, families killed, children taken, communities destroyed. Roman society offered no language for this grief. There was no expectation of recovery, only endurance. Religion offered little refuge. Many captives were separated from their traditional beliefs and rituals. Some adopted Roman gods as a strategy for survival. Others held private practices in silence. Faith became personal and hidden, like grief. A small number of women entered Roman households as concubines. This position did not grant security. While some gained influence or bore children who were later freed, many lived in uncertainty. Their status depended entirely on the favor of one man. Aging or displeasure could result in sale or abandonment. Manumission or freedom was possible but rare. When granted, it often came after years of service and did not erase social stigma. A freed woman carried the mark of slavery for life. Legal rights remained restricted. Roman literature sometimes romanticized conquest, portraying captured women as symbols of victory or beauty. These portrayals masked reality. They reduced suffering to background detail. The empire celebrated triumphs with parades that displayed captives in chains. The crowd saw the result of victory, not the cost. For ordinary Roman citizens, this system was invisible and normalized. Slavery supported daily life. Cheap labor built roads, cleaned homes, and fed cities. The suffering of captives, especially women, was distant enough to ignore. Captured women also faced cultural erasure. Languages were lost. Traditions disappeared within a generation. Children raised in Roman households learned to serve Rome, not remember their origins. In this way, conquest continued long after armies moved on. Disease followed captivity closely. Poor nutrition, stress, and overcrowding weakened immune systems. In cities, enslaved women were exposed to repeated outbreaks of illness. Death was common and unremarked. Replacement was easy. Aging brought new fears. Women who could no longer work were often discarded. Some were sold again. Others were left to survive on charity, which was limited and unreliable. Old age offered no dignity. The Roman state benefited from this system at every level. Taxes were paid with profits from slavery. Victorious generals gained prestige and wealth. Soldiers expected captives as part of their reward. Violence became institutional. There were moments of resistance. Some women attempted escape. Others resisted in quieter ways, slowing work, preserving memories, teaching children forbidden stories. These acts were dangerous and rarely recorded. History remembers systems more than individuals. The silence of ancient sources does not mean the absence of suffering. It reflects whose pain was considered worth recording. Captured women existed in the margins of Roman history, yet they formed the foundation of its expansion. As centuries passed, Rome portrayed itself as a bringer of order and civilization. Roads, laws, and cities remained. The lives destroyed to build them were largely forgotten. For captured women, Roman victory meant the loss of autonomy, identity, and safety. It was not a single event, but a lifelong condition imposed by defeat. Today, the ruins of Rome stand as symbols of endurance and power. Beneath them lies a quieter story, one of ordinary women whose lives were reshaped by forces beyond their control. Their suffering was not accidental. It was built into the structure of conquest. Remembering this does not require outrage or spectacle. It requires acknowledgement. Empires are not only measured by what they build, but what they take, and by those who are forced to endure the taking. For the captured women of Roman conquests, survival itself was an act of endurance. Their voices are mostly lost. Their experiences remain, woven into the silent foundations of history. In many cases, captivity did not end with the first owner. Enslaved women were frequently sold, traded, or transferred as debts changed hands. Each transfer brought new uncertainty. A woman who had learned the routines and dangers of one household could be forced to adapt again, losing any fragile stability she had built. With each sale, the past became more distant, and survival depended on forgetting as much as remembering. Urban slavery exposed women to constant public visibility, but also constant danger. In crowded Roman cities, enslaved women moved through streets daily, carrying goods or accompanying their owners. Harassment was common. Protection was minimal. Any accusation, whether true or false, could result in punishment. The word of an enslaved woman held little weight against that of a free citizen. Some women were assigned to work in taverns or inns. These environments blurred the line between labor and exploitation. Alcohol, transient customers, and weak oversight created conditions where abuse was frequent. Disease spread quickly. Injuries went untreated. The work continued regardless of illness. Captured women who showed skill in crafts such as weaving or embroidery were sometimes trained further. Their labor produced valuable goods, yet their own living conditions remained harsh. Skill did not guarantee safety. It only increased economic worth, which often prolonged exploitation rather than ending it. Pregnancy added another layer of fear. Childbirth in the ancient world was dangerous even for free women with family support. For enslaved women, the risks were greater. Poor nutrition, exhaustion, and lack of medical care led to high mortality. Those who survived childbirth were expected to return to work quickly. Grief over children taken or sold was carried silently. Children born to captive women were often removed at a young age. Some were sold separately. Others were trained early for labor. Mothers had little control over their fate. This separation deepened trauma and reinforced the powerlessness of captivity. In frontier regions, conditions could be even harsher. Newly conquered territories lacked stable infrastructure. Enslaved women there faced violence from soldiers, settlers, and local elites competing for control. Law was distant and uneven. Survival depended on obedience and chance. There were rare instances where Roman authors acknowledged suffering indirectly, through descriptions of despair or mass death after conquest. Yet even these moments framed suffering as inevitable. Compassion was not extended to individuals, but abstractly to the idea of war's cost. Time did not necessarily heal trauma. Years of captivity hardened routines, but did not erase loss. Many women lived long lives in slavery, carrying memories that could not be spoken. Their identities were shaped by endurance rather than choice. When Rome eventually declined, the system that had consumed these lives faded slowly. The women themselves were already gone. Their experiences survived only in fragments, inferred from laws, accounts, and absences in the record. The fate of captured women after Roman conquests was not an exception to the rule of empire. It was the rule. Quiet, systematic, and accepted. Their suffering did not shape monuments or texts, but it sustained the power that produced them. In remembering this, history becomes less distant. It becomes human again.